Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of our chapter 11 video, and I left off in this slide where we were going to talk about the equation of exchange. So this is a really important equation. It's pretty simple, but it has very important implications, and I mean literally government economists use this to manage the economy in a very important way. So definitions first, MV equals PY. So M is the money supply, and remember what that is. That's the amount of money in circulation and readily spendable in form. It's not all the money ever printed. It's just that kind of that money that's in people's cash and checking accounts and forms that they can easily spend. V is something called the velocity of money, and that is if you take all those dollars in the money supply and you could track how many times each one gets spent in a given period of time. Usually that's a year. That's the velocity of money. So we generally assume that to be kind of constant. It doesn't change very much from one year to the next. P is just a measure of the average price level. Usually that's done with one of those indices like the Consumer Price Index. And then Y is real GDP. So if you take MV, right, the money times the velocity of money, M times V gives you total spending because it's literally all the spendable money out there multiplied by how many times it gets spent in a year. That will give you the total spending in the economy for a year. PY is the total output or nominal GDP because it's real GDP, which is how much stuff we produce multiplied by the average price level. So that gives you nominal GDP. So basically all this equation is telling us is that total spending equals total output. That's exactly what the circular flow model, which you've seen before, tells you. It's common sense. It's absolutely true. We know this to be true. Total spending does equal total output. So this is just kind of a fancy way of writing that. Now, here's why this equation is important and how economists actually use it. Assume for now that real GDP, which is Y in that equation, is growing at 5%. So that's a pretty good clip. The economy is doing really well. The government, through the Federal Reserve, controls the rate of growth of the money supply. So let's assume they're allowing the money supply to grow at 2%. If V is constant, if the velocity is constant, then MV is growing at 2%. And if Y is growing 5%, what's happening to P? Well, it must be decreasing by about 3%. So in this case, because of mismanagement of the money supply, we're seeing deflation of about 3%. Now, declining prices might sound good, but they're really not a good thing. They're very bad for an economy. So what should the government do if it wants stable prices? A lot of times the Federal Reserve sets a target. They want either zero, or usually what they like is about like 2 or 3% inflation, kind of slow, steady inflation. So the way to do that is to allow the money supply to grow at about or slightly faster than real GDP. So allow M to match Y. So if Y is growing at 5% and the money supply grows at 5%, we would get roughly zero inflation, stable prices. Your book also shows you this form. That formula can be rewritten. It's not exactly mathematically true, but roughly, if you take all the percent changes and you add up the percent change in M plus V, it's going to be roughly equal to percent change in P plus Y. And since we have assumed that velocity is constant, its percent change is zero, so that can just fall out. So basically, you get the equation at the bottom. Percent change in price level is roughly equal to the difference between the percent change in the money supply and real GDP. So the point, again, is at the bottom. Controlling the size and the growth of the money supply largely helps determine the rate of inflation. So economists have a set of tools, which we'll study in the next couple of chapters, for doing exactly that and controlling that money supply. All right, the book shows you this. This will be pretty quick, but we talked about the Phillips curve and how it has that negative slope, but that's only the short run Phillips curve. In the long run, the Phillips curve is vertical. And that's because in the long run, we tend to always come back to what's called the natural rate of unemployment. Hopefully you've picked that term up somewhere along the way. But the natural rate of unemployment is the same thing as full employment. Basically, it means that everybody in the economy who wants a job has one. So if that's kind of our long run equilibrium, anything that happens to the price level just kind of goes, the inflation rate can go up or down, but in the long run, if we always come back to that same unemployment rate, that curve is going to be vertical. I hope that made sense. I feel like I didn't explain that very well, but all right. I think that's about it. There are 3 types of unemployment and different causes for those. I'll leave you to read those. They're near the end of the chapter. They're pretty self-explanatory and pretty easy, so I'm not going to talk about them here. One more bonus point opportunity. You guys who are watching know that occasionally I throw out bonus points for watching the videos. So here's a very nice picture from just after sunrise from last year when I climbed Mount Rainier. So email or text me that you know I climbed Mount Rainier last summer, and I'll give you another bonus point. All right. Thanks. Whoops. Stop sharing.